Welcome to Circular Soundbites, the podcast breaking down ideas, systems, and decisions driving real progress in the circular economy.
Circular Soundbites, a Reconomy podcast.
I am your host, Aimee Campanella, Development Director at Reconomy, and this is our series called Thread Talks. And I am honored to be here today with our special guest, Alan Wheeler, the CEO of the Textile Recycling Association, which is the UK's industry body for textile collectors, sorters, and recyclers. Alan has been working in the industry for just over 20 years, representing the industry and advocating for them within policy and other spaces. Alan, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Alan, you and I have known each other for just about a decade.
Yes, you're right. We first met when you were working for a business in Bristol called Bristol Textiles, which is a collector and sorter. I remember you invited me down to a number of the events that you hosted yourself with your local charities and other collection partners.
We started doing kilo sales there, and I remember people waiting outside in line at 5 a.m. to get in for those kilo sales. We were at about, I think, £5 a kilo we were selling.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, Alan, because you are the CEO for the Textile Recycling Association, but actually there really isn't that much recycling happening, is there?
No, indeed. So actually the current market is very much predicated around collecting and sorting for the grades that have value, and in this case it is the reuse that has the value. So yes, recycling does happen, but you won't find many collectors that are targeting, if any collectors targeting recycling grades. So when you go, for example, to a textile bank, it will possibly list what they want on the bank and what they don't want. And that messaging is very much predicated around we want good quality reusable clothing items, or good quality household textiles, what we tend to refer to as 2D textiles, and encourages the public not to donate lower quality recycling grades. That messaging, though, when you actually put it out there, you're still going to get around 30% coming in that has to go for recycling. So recycling does happen, but it's not something that is targeted, and it's not something that makes money. So typically, for every ton of recycled material that is put in a collection, our members are losing about £400 a ton.
So, Alan, you've been in the industry for just over 20 years. Tell us a bit about your journey in textile recycling. How did you get into the TRA, and how have you seen things really change over the past couple of decades?
Okay, well, I've always had an interest in environmental issues, even going back to, when I first started at university. I was on one of the first university courses that looked at environmental sciences. Then I was a recycling officer for the third local authority in the country to introduce alternate weekly collections of waste and recycling. Then one day, in one of the trade journals, I saw this advert saying that the Textile Recycling Association was looking for a manager, and I applied for the job. And it was very early days in the world of textiles, and I ended up getting it. So that's how I started in the association, and we're talking, like you say, over 20 years ago now since I got that post.
And what did the Textile Recycling Association look like then? Its members and the infrastructure?
Yeah, it was very much, as you've already described, it was an association of just collectors and sorters. And I would still say that's the fundamental base of our membership today. But things have moved on since then. So it was about collecting from charities, trying to offer them the best service, and then selling them into markets in Africa mainly, but also into places like Pakistan as well. And that was the only business model that was on the table, and there was no involvement whatsoever with representation work in terms of trying to represent our industry to the government and trying to represent our interests to the EU. Obviously, we were very much in the European Union at that time, and there was policies being developed around plastics, around metals, around paper, but no policymaker was even really aware of our industry. and they were certainly not aware of the impacts that the textile industry has on things like carbon emissions and water consumption and so on and so forth. So that was where our journey had to start. If you recycle or divert a ton of paper away from landfill or incineration, that will have a different impact to, if you divert a ton of textiles. And what we began to find out was that actually removing a ton of textiles, even though it only accounts for something like 3 or 4% of the waste stream, delivers far more benefits than collecting some of these other materials.
And why is that? What's the difference between textiles and other materials like papers and plastics, which we've had a more developed infrastructure for collecting historically?
That is in part down to the fact that we are collecting for reuse. So in that respect, we are keeping materials in use for longer, and we are putting them into markets where there is demand for those products, and actually so reuse is top of the waste hierarchy. It delivers the most benefits because effectively you're not doing anything to the product other than making sure that it is staying in use for as long as possible. The other thing is it's also removing the need to produce new items. And the fashion and textiles industry, we're becoming far more aware of the huge carbon impacts and the huge water consumption impacts that the fashion and textiles industry has.
Huge environmental impacts from the production of textiles. So taking us back to the history behind textile collecting and sorting, and how charity retail plays a big part in this. How have you seen that develop over the years, that infrastructure? I've heard that collectors and sorters back in the day used to be called rag and bone men. Is there truth in that?
Oh, many of our members are, small family-run enterprises, and yes, you can go into their places and you'll see how their forebears were collecting using horse and cart. Back in the day. By the time I'd come in, they'd upgraded to a van. So, but essentially they were still doing the same thing. And if I'm honest with you, that still very much is part of the cornerstone of today's infrastructure. So we are actually collecting quite a lot of clothing in this country, probably more so than any other country in the world, because, as you mentioned, we have this network of charity shops that really doesn't exist in any other country, not to the same extent. So today, I think there are around 11,000 charity shops, and the donations to charity shops by the public account for about 50% of all clothing donations, if you like. So they donate it to the charity shop. The charity will then have an assessment of whether that item can be sold in the shop. And if it can't, they might try and divert it to one of their other stores if that's appropriate. But it's around 50% of what is donated is actually sold in the shop. The remaining 50% gets sold out to the trade. So many of them will sell those items will come out the back, and then they come back to a UK-based collector. In the past, a lot of that sorting was the collector would then sort it rather, and it would then be sorted either for the African market or the Asian market, and it would be sorted for reuse, be sorted for recycling. Regretfully, what has happened over the last sort of 10, 15 years is because of the costs of running a business in this country, that sorting has offshored. So initially it kind of went to Eastern Europe, and now it's gone further afield into Asia, and it might even go even further afield into the Far East, like back into places like India and Pakistan. So that's an issue, because although the sorting is still being done before the clothing reaches its final destination, the further afield it is, the more difficult it is to trace what's happening. And of course, we want to create more jobs here in the UK.
The charity retail and the collectors and sorters are very much essential parts of each other's ecosystems.
Absolutely.
And you've mentioned how that ecosystem has been interrupted because the sorting that used to happen here in the UK is now happening elsewhere. Why is it happening elsewhere?
It's simply down to economics. To actually sort used clothing, you have to do it manually, and to train somebody to do it really effectively, you have to train them, and that will take approximately 6 months to get them up to speed. And then the other factor that is really crucial is obviously wage costs in this country are quite high, certainly compared to other parts of Europe, so particularly Eastern Europe, although even Eastern Europe is catching up. And so with those wage costs, you're thinking, well, okay, how can we do this in a more cost-effective way? And for the time being, until we have automated sorting, that means that we're going to have to, obviously look at where is it more economically efficient to sort. So that's why it then originally or more recently offshored into places like Dubai, and now it's going further afield. So that it's a real sort of cost factor. It's the real expense of actually training somebody up to be able to identify, is that a good quality item? Is it suitable for the Eastern European market? Is it suitable for the African market? Is it fashionable, even down to the point of, is it fashionable, say, in somewhere like Ghana, but maybe not Togo next door, which does happen. So you've got to have a really good knowledge of it, and you've got to be able to do it at speed. I've tried sorting. I can't do it for toffee. I end up, looking at the label, saying, okay, is that polyester? Is it cotton? Is it nylon? Is it whatever? And very often the label is gone. So you have to be able to do this sorting by feel, more than anything else. And it's really difficult. And so you've got to have really highly trained people to do that kind of sorting.
The sortation that used to predominantly happen in the UK is now happening overseas, and that has a lot to do with economical reasons.
Yeah.
And you've touched upon the complexities behind that sorting process, some of the different grades. Is that the right terminology?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're sorting, for firstly, the initial pre-sort is it suitable for recycling, or is it suitable for reuse, which is obviously what our businesses want. But you're also then sorting for the different global markets. So the demands for different types of clothing in in Eastern Europe are going to be very different to what's required in sub-Saharan Africa. And even there's a difference between West Africa and East Africa, and even differences in fashion demands from different countries that may be neighbouring each other. So, you might get a entirely different demand for clothing going into Ghana as opposed to, say, Togo or Sierra Leone or wherever. So those sorters really need that knowledge about what is suitable for the particular markets that they are sorting for.
There is a demand for good quality reusable textiles in these markets.
Absolutely. And this is perhaps something that's not necessarily understood. What we're actually doing in Europe is we are collecting the materials, and then we are sorting for them. Yes, of course, these businesses have their business partners in the global south, but essentially they are sorting the clothing and they are putting it up for sale on the global used clothing markets. What actually dictates the flow of used clothing is not our insistence that it goes to these countries. It's the wholesalers buying those materials from UK sorters, from European sorters, and then importing it into those countries. So it's the demand that dictates the flow, and that's something that's really important to understand, and perhaps is not necessarily captured in the wider sort of media coverage of our industry at the moment.
And what's that demand like right now?
Well, it's very competitive, I have to say, because when I started 20 years ago, it was very much a case of half a dozen countries in northwestern Europe, along with some collections being done in the United States of America, and they were collecting their used clothing, and they were trading with African wholesalers and obviously with wholesalers who were taking the recycling grades in places like Pakistan. That gives you an indication of the time frame that we're talking about. And people went, well, we need to become more sustainable. And so everybody started collecting more, not just the 6 countries in northwestern Europe, but the whole of Europe. the whole of North America, and even the untapped potential of China. If you're a buyer in Africa, you might say, oh, actually, I can, instead of just buying from the UK, I can now buy from China at a different price, or I can buy from, perhaps more stock from Canada or Japan or whatever. It's a buyer's market in the used clothing industry, and so for us who are trading it and selling it on, it's very difficult.
You've touched upon a lot of different regions that are now involved in the collecting and sorting and exporting of textiles. How does their infrastructure in Europe, in India, in China, in the US differ to the UK, which you've explained about how we've got this ecosystem between charity retail as the initial collectors receiving the donations from the general public, and then that flow going from collectors to sorters?
Okay, so my experience obviously is very much focused around the European and the North American market. If you go into a sorter business, which is where the real sort of nub of the action is taking place, a collector will collect the materials and then sell it onto a sorter. Okay, if you go to a sorter in this country, or you go to a sorter in Germany or in Eastern Europe, it looks very much the same. So you'll have the sorters doing the initial pre-sort, and then you'll have those then that are sorting for the different grades that I explained earlier. So that the actual process in the warehousing to differentiate between the good quality reusable items and sorting them for the appropriate markets, it looks very, very similar. And I suspect if I went to a sorting hub in China, it would look very similar. The difference, I would say, in continental mainland Europe is that they don't have the network of charity shops. So whereas around 35% of our material comes through textile banks, on the continent it's almost exclusively textile bank collections, and charity shop donations has a much smaller portion of the collections. I think what's interesting was that I was in a sorting house in Slovenia just a few months ago, and they themselves are importing used clothing from all over Europe. So they're buying it from the collectors themselves, taking it to their sorting hub, and then they're doing the detailed sort that I explained. But they themselves, because they are in Eastern Europe, they already have. Eastern Europe is still a significant market for used clothing in itself. And they have a whole network of their own shops throughout Slovenia, and indeed, and I think it's in around 6 or 7 countries around Eastern Europe, where they are selling their own products in their own shops. And indeed, when I was there, I was only there for 3 or 4 days. I'd walked past several of their shops, and they were all very busy. So, they have a slightly different business model when it comes to selling it on at the end.
So does that appropriate infrastructure start at the consumption stage? Does it start with what we're buying, or where does it start?
Well, the consumption will have to be a change in business models, which is a really difficult sell, and it needs to happen along the entire supply chain. What we do need is a change in our infrastructure and in our ability to handle the low quality materials that are coming through in increasing numbers. For every tonne of material that we collect through recycling, we're currently losing £400 a tonne. So trying to convince a collector stroke sorter that we need to target that material is, again, really, really difficult. But the reality of it is with all this ultra fast fashion that's coming onto the market and that we're consuming in ever increasing numbers, and with the political drive that we are certainly seeing from Europe, and that we expect to see coming from the UK very shortly when they publish their circular economy strategy in the next month or two, we are going to have to collect more material. We are already collecting the good quality material that I think has the highest value. So when we collect more material, we know what's going to happen. The quality is going to decline even further. And if we've got nowhere to sell it to, then what are we going to do with it? How do we start making money from that low quality material? It's too expensive for us to sort manually, and the brands and retailers and other textile manufacturers don't can't use that material. For retailers, they've got to understand who their clients are, who their customers are, and what drives them, in these matters. So, it might be that if they want to offer a retail take-back scheme, for some of them, it could be that they just partner up with a charity partner, and I would say very much use a proper commercial collector who knows what they're doing. But maybe, have this thing where if you donate your clothing to our retail take-back scheme, a charity will benefit in some way. But for others, that won't necessarily be the driver. And I think the fact that we're seeing increasing successes through online resale platforms like Vinted and Depop says actually others are more driven by their desire to get something from their used clothing themselves. So I think there's a question there to be sort of answered by the retailers, and maybe they want to partner up with a charitable organisation, or maybe they want to offer an incentive to their customers. They could possibly do both actually as well. So there's options, and plus we've still got 50% of the material ending up in the black bin. So there's still great potential for us to collect more.
Before we get into the future, what is actually getting recycled and how?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we target the better quality items because that's what we can generate the profit from. But even though we say we only want those materials, around 30% of what is collected is just not good enough to be reused, and so it is recycled. It goes into mechanical recycling processes. And the simplest form of mechanical recycling is you've got an old worn-out T-shirt, you cut it into a rectangle, and you've got a wiping cloth. An industrial wiping cloth that is really useful for cleaning industrial machinery, machines, that kind of thing. So that's a really useful market. Other ways in which you can recycle the textiles, you can pull the fabrics, you can use them. The resulting fibres in the manufacture of heat and sound insulation, or indeed impact insulation in cars. So, your car will almost certainly have recycled fibres, within it. So those are, again, really important materials. Bedding materials as well. So there's a lot of different applications that we've been using for years and years. We've been able to supply those industries because we had been the only people collecting, and they were buying it in the quantities that enabled us to sell it on. Now that we've got more and more countries collecting more materials, they're not buying any more of the recycled grades. So we need to find new recycling markets, be they chemical recycling markets, which would enable us to recycle a fibre back into a very similar quality fibre. And therefore, eventually, we could take clothing and recycle that back into clothing, in theory, if that's what we want to achieve.
We've got mechanical recycling. Chemical recycling is an option. It's something that could be developed.
Yeah.
What do we need? What drivers do we need to help develop recycling and to also preserve the collecting and sorting for the reuse market?
What we need is the backing of governments. And that can be delivered through policies that signal that brands, retailers, textile producers need to invest in recycling infrastructures. We know that the European Union have introduced or are introducing extended producer responsibility schemes for clothing and textiles. France has had one in place since 2008. The Netherlands introduced their scheme last year. There's a couple of others in Eastern Europe that have also been put on the statute books. But importantly, just a few months ago, the European Union passed a directive that means that all member states must introduce an extended producer responsibility scheme on clothing and textiles, and those EPR schemes must be operational by April 2028. Now, you might ask, well, what does an extended producer responsibility scheme entail? Essentially, the notion is that if a product is in scope for extended producer responsibility, then those businesses or those entities that put that product on the market must either pay a levy on that product, which is then used to fund the collection and sorting and recycling of that product at the end of its life. And we very much hope to see that coming onto the statute books in the UK in the next few years as well.
What would be the dream, the ultimate goal to get the infrastructure to?
What I have mentioned already is the expense of actually doing the manual sorting process. Now, when you're dealing with a commodity that has high value, such as the good quality reusable clothing, then it still makes sense to actually pay somebody to sort the items professionally and to sort them for the appropriate markets. And I think the capability of AI and whatever to deliver that is still going to be some way off. Where there is much more potential is the possibility that we could use new automated sorting processes to sort the low value recycling grades. So we wouldn't have to pay the machine as such £12 an hour or whatever to actually sort something that has very little value. So if we can develop those techniques, and that is something that is making progress, then it would improve the economic efficiencies of sorting, and therefore that would bring those costs down, and therefore if we're able to sell the materials on for even a nominal value, we're still potentially able to make a profit on those. But we also do want to increase the demand for recycling grades as well, and I would say what is of absolute fundamental importance there is that we have an ambition set by governments to have mandatory minimum recycled content targets in all new products. Now, in the European Union, that is actually being delivered through the establishment of the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulation, where all new products put on the market will have to, that are put into scope, they will have to comply with those regulations. And it's through that particular thing, we call it the ESPR for short, that they are evaluating whether they can have minimum recycled content in all new products, which sounds simple in principle, but there are many complex things. Do you measure it? Do you have differentiations between different fibre types? Do you have differentiation between different garment types? Do you report it at product level? Do you report it at portfolio level? There's still so many questions to answer, but the European Union are working on that.
With automated sorting, am I right in thinking that the TRA, the Textile Recycling Association, was involved in a UK project around that?
Indeed, we were. So we were project partners for an Innovate UK funded project called the ACT project, the Automated Sorting for Circular Textiles project. So in that, we were evaluating the business case for implementing an automated sorting process here in the UK. So what these processes do, if I can just explain briefly, is that even a professional sorter, they will have an issue trying to decide whether, let's say, a polycotton blend is 70% polyester or 30% cotton, or 30% polyester and 70%. And those kind of differentiations can be really important when it comes to trying to meet those sorting specifications. Also, we can't really tell realistically how much elastane is in a product. Yes, they are excellent at sorting for reuse, but sorting for recycling manually is very, very difficult. I would say near enough impossible. With these new sorting technologies that are being developed, the most common one, the process that is being adapted is by using near infrared technology. Now that technology is working quite well. It's advancing well, but there are still many issues to overcome. So one particular issue is the near infrared will only tell you what is the composition at that one point that it's at. Okay, so if you've got a product that has different components, this bit might be cotton, that bit might be polyester, the collar might be polyester. I don't know. That's just an example. You also have multi-layers in products. which again causes problems. So it can't read what's on the underneath. So that's another problem. Near infrared, by its very characteristics, it can't detect whether there is no colour. And effectively, what you are wearing is a garment that has no colour. It is black. So it's very difficult for these technologies to pick out what a black garment is made up of. And then there's simple things like buttons. These are what we are called disruptors or zips, and those need to be removed before we can send them for recycling. So it's also very, very difficult to get a robot to take a pile of clothing, pick it up, and put it onto a conveyor belt. That is something that has vexed the industry, but I have to say they're making real progress in that. So the last there are a number of people on the continent who are developing these kind of processes, and the last one I saw, they had a fairly accurate pick rate, but we're still talking about 1 out of 10 picks done by the robot was faulty in some way. Either it would try and pick up the garment and it would miss it, or it would do a double pick, where it's picked up 2 garments and put it on the belt. So there's still some way to go in that.
And how does that compare to the current process manually?
For recycling, you can't do it. That's the thing. That I'm being brutally honest. You cannot sort for the nuanced compositions that are required for recycling. So that's why chemical recycling is still really quite difficult, and mechanical recycling is the one that's popular.
Is the ultimate goal for us to scale fibre-to-fibre recycling for textiles?
I think it's an important one. I don't think it's the only one. That's the thing. So yes, it's a great thing to be able to say, yes, I can recycle the clothing back into a clothing item. That is circular. It makes absolute sense. But I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there are many other applications which we could use in the future to recycle textile items from and into new products. So I would say it's got to be a mixture of both, developing the mechanical recycling processes and the fibre-to-fibre and the chemical recycling processes.
What's one bit of advice that you would give to a brand or retailer on helping to maintain and improve the current infrastructure around textile collection, sorting, and processing?
Yeah, well, I'm going to sort of take that back and sort of say, actually, even though charities are very well established and they're really important to support, we are still throwing away in this country around 50% of all the textiles that are put on the market. So there's still a huge opportunity for us to tap in and collect more textiles. So we need more collection systems in place, and we need to make them as convenient as possible for the public to use, and for those brands and retailers that operate across different countries, the compelling reason to do this is even more stark, because actually in the EU as a whole, still around 75% of all the materials put on the market are disposed of there. So the EU actually has a much lower average collection rate than we do, and they're still throwing away a lot more than we are in percentage terms. So we need to collect more materials.
Alan, is there anything that you would like to add that we have not covered today?
So I think one way in which the retailers could help is to actually look at whether they can implement a retail take-back scheme. So what I would say at the start is that I would certainly engage with a professional collection company, because they are the ones who will be able to have the collection infrastructure in place that will be able to deliver that for you. But if your customer is driven by the desire to raise some money for charity, then why not consider partnering up with a charity? But I would also say that not all consumers are driven by that incentive. So the fact that we have seen an explosion in the use of online platforms like Vinted and Depop and also eBay, who have been around now for a number of years, I think that says actually some of your customers will want to make money for themselves as well. So maybe could you offer them an option which would incentivize them in that way? I think that is something that would be, really quite interesting. So yeah, I would very much encourage it, and I would very much, encourage people to speak to us about it. And yeah.
A great starting point is for us to improve the collection rates.
Yeah.
And in the UK, brands and retailers can reach out to the Textile Recycling Association to get a reputable collector to support. Where, for brands and retailers that are listening that are outside of the UK, where can they go to find a reputable collector to help support if they're developing their own take-back system from scratch?
I'm glad you asked me that, because two of my other roles are that I am the General Secretary of the Textiles Division at the Bureau of International Recycling, which is the global recycling trade association for recycling industries. And we have a textiles division. Separately, I'm also on the board of the Textiles Board of Recycling Europe, which some of you may know as EURIC, but it recently changed its name about 3 months ago. So they are a European trade association of textile recycling trade association, so National Textile Recycling Trade Association. And yes, they have a really extensive network of collectors and sorters amongst them within Europe, including the UK. So again, my friends and colleagues at Recycling Europe would also be able to help you there.
Fantastic. So the advice we can give brands and retailers today is that there's 3 different associations that you're involved with that they can reach out to understand more, to learn more, and to set up take-back systems. So we've got, if you don't mind just repeating the 3 for us and how best to reach out to each of those 3.
Just search up our names: Textile Recycling Association, Bureau of International Recycling, and Recycling Europe. And if you're based in North America, you might want to contact the US Trade Association, SMART, and I would find their details by searching SMART Textile Recycling.
Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure for me as well. Thank you.
This has been a Circular Soundbites podcast from Reconomy. Thank you all for listening. If you've enjoyed listening to Circular Soundbites today, check out more on all major streaming platforms or visit our YouTube channel. Or if you'd like to learn more about Reconomy and the circular economy, check us out on LinkedIn or visit us at reconomy.com.
Circular Soundbites, a Reconomy podcast.